This is an introduction to responsive web design. During this video, I will talk about the concept responsive web design and show a little bit about how it's done. First, I will give an introduction to the concept responsive web design. Then I will talk about one of the three main topics in responsive web design. It's media queries, the CSS media queries. It's the fluid grid concept with the percentages instead of fixed width pixels. And it's about flexible images, how to use the max width of the image in CSS. And then at the end I will just show a few resources where to go and find some more info. First of all, introduction to the responsive web design. Responsive web design, the concept is quite new. It's only a few years ago that this guy, Ethan McCott, he coined this phrase or this term, responsive web design, because he saw that the possibilities with the media queries and the fluid grid and the flexible images all together could solve some of those issues that that many websites had about how to scale from one screen resolution at the desktop to the tablet and to the phone. So responsive web design is about how to reuse your CSS and your HTML across the platforms. So you don't have to rewrite your CSS. You can add some breakpoints in your CSS where you can say that this part will go only for the phone, this part will go only for the tablet, and this part will go for the desktop or laptop or whatever it may be. Let's have a look at what media queries is. First of all, let's pretend that we have a desktop this wide, or it could be a laptop. Anything else that goes in this example, I have used 1024 pixels as the width. That means that what is above 1024 pixels will be rendered as desktop or laptop. And next we have the tablet, and in this case I just use that what is between 480 pixels and less than 1024 pixels will be a tablet. And the last one is of course the phone. That means that everything below 480 pixels will be the phone resolution. So in order to handle these screen resolutions, these different platforms, we need to have some breakpoints. In this case, in this example, I'm using a breakpoint at 1024 pixels and one breakpoint at 480 pixels. If you want to have a look at some showcases, some websites that use this concept, responsive web design, I will recommend that you go to this webpage, mediaquery.es, where you can see the latest responsive web designs in different screen resolutions, and you can play around with them and have a look at the code. So, media queries, how do we do it? Let's have a look at some basic HTML. I've made this this HTML file where I include this style sheet, and there's nothing in my HTML because I just want to show how the breakpoints works, and I don't need any markup except the basics to demonstrate that. In my style, I say that okay, the basic background will be this blue background, and when I'm below 1024 pixels, I will have this green background, and the last one that means when my screen resolution is maximum 480 pixels, that means a phone, I will have this pink background. See, this is above 1024, below 1024, and below 480 pixels. That means that what we specify in the section with the max width 1024, that means the middle one, will also go for the last one. That means less than 480. If there's something in the middle section that is specified that we can override in the 480 sections, that means the last section, it will happen. And that's because style sheets or cascading style sheets means that what comes last will have the will be the one that be rendered. So let's have a look at how it looks. So we went from the blue to the green to the pink. Let's just show it again. And in order to get some numbers on the screen, I just made a small JavaScript, which I include in my HTML file. I just call the file show device width, and I won't go into detail because it's not about JavaScript, but you can use this to display a little box with the actual screen resolution if you want to use it for your own testing. So when I include this, it looks like something like this. Now we have a box up in the upper left corner. We can see that now it's 480 and it shifts, and then up again to 1024 and it shifts again. So that was media queries. We have this breakpoints. We use the add media for making these breakpoints. Now let's have a look at the fluid grid. The fluid grid is about going from the fixed width to the flexible width. This is a traditional web page, and if you look at this web page on a mobile phone, you have to pinch to zoom in, and that can be very annoying if you want to look at some details or whatever it may be. So I'll just replay this again. This is the typical way, or the traditional way. It doesn't scale, all the elements just stay the same. I made this example with a header and a content on the left side, a sidebar on the right side, and in the bottom I have the footer. The HTML looks like this. I have a wrapper outside. That means a div that centers all the content. And inside the wrapper I have a header and the content and the sidebar and the footer. And the CSS looks like this. I have here the wrapper at 1024 pixels wide. I put in a margin at 30 pixels, and then I have the header again. It's 1024 pixels wide. It has a fixed height just for the example. I have a margin button to make some space below it. I have the content with a width of 600 pixels at the sidebar, 400 pixels, and the footer, like the header, just this one is the footer has a height at 100 pixels, whereas the header has a height of 150 pixels. So that gives us this layout on that you can see in the lower left corner. When we want to make it a fluid grid, it will scale like this. That means we, instead of pixels, we use percentages. I'll just show this again. So all elements scale according to the screen resolution, and that's one of the main parts of responsive web design. When we want to make a responsive web design or fluid grid, we can transform all the pixels into percentages, but we have to be careful because we're not allowed to go over the 100%, of course. So let's have a look at how we transform it. In the wrapper, we said that the wrapper had to have a width of 98%. That means we have a little space in the left and the right. And we have the margin. The margin is a 2% margin I set in. And the header is 100%. That means it will scale according to the wrapper. It will fill out the wrapper. And the margin bottom, I put in 2% instead of 24 pixels. And for the content, I say that it's 61% in the width instead of 600 pixels. That leaves us 39% left for the sidebar and the margin. And the margin I set at 2%. That leaves us 37% for the sidebar width. And I put in again a margin bottom as in the header. And this margin bottom is 2%. As for the header, also for the footer, a width of 100%, so it scales according to the wrapper. So now we have our fixed layout made flexible, or fluid as it calls when it's percentages we use instead of pixels. Now we like to mix the fluid and the fixed, and I'll just replay this again. As you can see, now we at 1163 pixels, and as you can see, we have some margin here in left and right, and this will be more, there will become more margin when we go above 1024 pixels. So that means if we have a screen resolution of 1500 pixels, it will not be stretched. All elements will not be stretched to 1500 pixels. They will just stay the same inside this wrapper I made at 1024 pixels. So this is a mix of the fluid and the fixed. Let's see how it's done. See, I set a wrapper at a width of 1024 pixels as before when I had the fixed layout. And then I said that if we are below 1024 pixels, we change it to a fluid grid instead of a fixed grid. And when we go down at the font size, that means a max width of 480 pixels, we don't do anything. We just let the wrapper stay the same. So that means we can mix the fluid and the fixed layout. So it looks like this. It scales down and then it stays the same, stay fixed when we come above 1024 pixels. Let's have a look at the flexible images. The flexible images concept is something like this, that no matter what happens, our images will scale according to the layout or the width of the parent element. And in this case, I put up a logo or something in the header, which has this size 1024 pixels wide. But when we scale down, it will scale according to the parent element or the header element, the div with the ID header. And I'll just replay this again, and you can see that when we arrive at the font size, it changes. So we have another header image, which can be useful when we design for mobile phones. So how is this done? I have this wrapper up here. This wrapper holds this header image, and inside this header I have put in an image called logo, or with an ID logo, with this source that comes from a folder called images, and has this file name. Then I put in a selector in my CSS that says that all images will have a max width of 100% and a height of auto. That means it scales according to the parent element that it is put into. And I can just replay this again, so you can see when we arrive at the font size, it changes the background image of the header. So how is that done? You can see over here that it's below the font size, or it's the font size below the 480 pixels. So that is how you can make your images more flexible. See, this is the important part for the logo. So we hide the logo when we arrive to the font size, and down here we exchange the background. So we have a background image on the header when we arrive at the font size, and when we leave the font size, we go back to the regular image. That means the black and white image that has a width of 1000 pixels. So now I'll just show you some responsive tricks. And this first trick I will show you is something like you may find useful when you design for a mobile phone. That, for example, in this case we have some menu items, and when there's enough resolution for example a tablet or a desktop, there's enough space for these menu items to be oriented horizontally. But when we arrive at the font size, we would like to have them displayed vertically. So how do we do that? This is the markup for our menu. We have an unordered list called menu, have an ID menu. Then we have 4 list items for our menu. And the CSS goes like this, standard CSS. If you want to make a horizontal menu or horizontal list, we have display inline, list style none, margin right at 40 pixels, so we have some space between the menu items, and we give the link another color, and we have a different font size, and we have a background color for it. And then when we arrive at the font size, that means below 480 pixels, something is changing. What is changing here is that we go from display inline to display block, as you can see in the last section, the last selector called hashmark menu li, and we give it a margin bottom at 5 pixels, so we have some space between the menu items vertically. And there's also a thing with the menu. I give it a margin left at minus 25 pixels just to adjust it in the horizontal direction towards the left. So this is what happens. This is how we go from horizontal to vertical. What happened at the video before was also that our content, or our content and sidebar, they were floating when we are at the tablet and the desktop, but when we arrive at the font size, they were stacked, so they were above each other. So let's have a look at how we did that. The content and the sidebar has these selectors and these properties. They have a width of 61% and 37%, and they float left, both of them. They have a height at 200 pixels and some colors and some margins. So in the responsive version, or when we arrive at the font size, we change the content and the sidebar so they have a width of 100%. That means they scale according to the wrapper. They will display as blocks. That means that they will not float beside each other. And they have a margin button, both of them, at 2%. So we have some space below or between them. So responsive web design contains of these three concepts. Media queries, where we have some breakpoints. We have the fluid grids, where we use percentages instead of fixed width. That means pixels. And we have our flexible images. So we use the max width and the hide auto to show the image, so it scales according to the parent element, for example a wrapper or a header, as in this example. The last thing we'll have a look at is the resources. This is the original article, the responsive web design from the web page, the blog called A List Apart, and I will recommend you to have a look at that. And then there's a lot of tutorials around the net, but these tutorials I show here from Smash Magazine, they are really high quality. You can find a lot of good tips and tricks and more advanced examples, so you will be more acquainted with the concept of responsive web design. Of course, I'll recommend you to buy the book or read the book, the original book, if you want to dig a little bit deeper into this responsive web design concept. In this book, Ethan McCott goes into detail with how to calculate all those percentages. So if you want to have a specific, keep a specific margin between elements, if you have this grid system, you can read the formulas in this book, and also the background info about how the formulas were invented. Otherwise, I will suggest or recommend that you have a look at some CSS frameworks that helps you with the responsive web design when your websites are larger than those small examples I showed you here. They could be quite handy to use these frameworks. A framework could be Twitter Bootstrap, it could be a Skeleton or Foundation, or there's a lot of responsive frameworks out there. So have a look at them.